Emma Harris wasn't the type to glide through life without a hiccup. In fact, the very idea of grace under pressure seemed like a distant fantasy to her. That morning, she had set out to prove that she could turn her life around. The interview at Taylor Global, one of the most prestigious companies in the city, was her big shot. But as the old saying goes, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Emma's day was about to unfold like a comedy of errors, the kind that only happens to people who seem to have more than their fair share of bad luck. She was already running late, nothing new there, when she discovered that the strap of her purse had broken. And, of course, this happened just as she was rushing down the sidewalk, trying to make a good impression. In her effort to fix it, her ballet flat decided to betray her, coming loose and flapping around with every step. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, buried somewhere under a pack of mints and an uncapped lipstick in her purse. It was her best friend, Sophia, sending frantic texts. "Emma, you have exactly 5 minutes to get here," it read. Of course, Emma tried to type a reply while running, but in true Emma fashion, she accidentally sent something garbled that autocorrected into bringing cheddar and mashed potatoes. Frustrated, she gave up on communication and decided to focus on surviving this chaotic moment. As she approached the massive glass building of Taylor Global, she could see a tiny glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to make a good impression. That was, until she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the shiny building's glass doors. Her heart sank as she realized what had gone terribly wrong. The zipper of her dress was now in the front, the giant clothing tag, looking more like a receipt from a restaurant, was proudly displayed on her chest, and the neckline, which was supposed to be at the back, was completely misplaced. She spun around, trying to adjust her dress in the reflection, but ended up performing what could only be described as a fashion reality show-worthy dance routine, tugging at the hem and twisting the straps in a frantic effort to make herself presentable. "How did I even get into this mess?" she muttered to herself, half exasperated and half amused. In those few moments, she wondered if this was some sort of sign that she should give up on her dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. But as fate would have it, she had already come this far, and there was no turning back now. Finally, she mustered up the courage to push through the revolving doors, only to be greeted by the cold, sleek lobby that looked like it came straight out of a business magazine. The receptionists were impeccably dressed, their suits so crisp that they practically glistened under the office lights. Emma, on the other hand, felt like she had stumbled out of a backyard barbecue. Her loose ballet flat continued to flap with every step, and she was still trying to hold herself together. "Hi, good morning. I'm here for the assistant interview," she said with a nervous smile, hoping to seem at least a little bit confident. Little did she know that her entrance would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. As Emma nervously approached the receptionist, the sound of her loose ballet flat flapping with every step seemed to echo in the pristine, hushed lobby of Taylor Global. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she'd ruined her chances before even stepping into the interview room. She forced herself to breathe deeply, reminding herself that this was her moment, she couldn't back out now. "Emma Harris," the receptionist said, not even glancing up from her perfectly manicured nails. With a subtle point, the woman directed Emma to the elevator. The doors slid open, and Emma stepped inside, giving herself a quick mental pep talk in the reflection of the polished elevator mirror. "Just get through this. No big deal," she whispered under her breath. The elevator ascended to the 25th floor. It was a sleek, modern building with glass walls and minimalist design, a far cry from the cozy, cluttered apartment where Emma had spent the last few years, juggling odd jobs just to make ends meet. As she stepped out of the elevator, her nerves almost got the best of her. The hallway was filled with impeccably dressed professionals walking briskly to and from meetings. Emma felt out of place, like an imposter in a world that didn't quite fit her. But as she was walking toward the interview room, fate had one more twist in store for her. Out of nowhere, Emma collided with someone in the hallway. She didn't even see him coming. Her heart skipped a beat as her entire body froze. There he was, James Taylor, the CEO of Taylor Global. Emma's eyes widened in shock as she realized the impact had caused his coffee to spill all over his crisp, white shirt. The shock on his face mirrored her own, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Emma's immediate instinct was to panic. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the shirt," she blurted out, rummaging through her purse to find whatever cash she had left. She pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, which she awkwardly shoved into his hand. James raised an eyebrow and looked down at the ruined coffee stain. $20, he asked, clearly amused. "You think that covers this?" "Oh no, I was just trying to make it right," Emma stammered, realizing just how ridiculous the situation had become. James chuckled, a real, genuine laugh that filled the hallway and caught the attention of a few passing employees. It was the kind of laugh that sounded so out of place in the stiff, corporate atmosphere. "You're something else, aren't you?" he said, still shaking his head in amusement. Emma could hardly believe what was happening. She had just spilled coffee on the CEO, her potential boss, and here he was, laughing about it like it was no big deal. "I'm just trying to get to my interview," Emma explained, blushing a deep shade of red. "I'm applying for the assistant position." James stepped aside, gesturing toward the interview room door with a smirk. "Well, good luck with that," he said, still barely holding back his laughter. "You're going to need it." As Emma entered the interview room, her heart was pounding harder than ever. She could already feel the weight of the disaster hanging over her head. But what she didn't know was that her chaotic entrance had already left an impression on James. Little did Emma realize, her fumbling and awkwardness were about to set the stage for something unexpected. Emma walked into the interview room with a sense of dread that could have been cut with a knife. Her heart was still pounding from the incident in the hallway with James Taylor, the CEO of Taylor Global. She had spilled his coffee, fumbled for money, and practically made a fool of herself, yet, somehow, he had been laughing, not angry. She couldn't shake the feeling that her chances of landing the job had just evaporated in a puff of coffee-scented smoke. The interview room, with its polished glass table and sleek, modern decor, was even more intimidating than she had imagined. There were 3 people seated on the other side of the table, 2 men and 1 woman, all impeccably dressed, their faces serious and expectant. Emma was almost certain they had already judged her based on her disastrous entrance, and the idea of facing them felt like an impossible challenge. "Miss Harris, is that right?" asked the woman, her voice cool and professional. She had her hair pulled into a tight bun, and her stern expression made Emma feel like she was about to be scolded. "Yes, absolutely right," Emma replied, trying to muster some confidence. She nearly saluted by accident, which only made her feel even more out of place. The woman exchanged a glance with the gray-haired man sitting next to her. "Please, introduce yourself," the gray-haired man said with a tone that suggested he was already preparing for the worst. Emma cleared her throat and, with a forced smile, began, "My name is Emma Harris, and I'm excited to be here today. I love learning new things," and before she could finish her sentence, her phone blared out, breaking her speech. The ringtone was a chaotic remix of Happy Birthday mixed with an ambulance siren, created by none other than her best friend, Sophia. "Oops. I'm so sorry," Emma said, hurriedly trying to silence her phone. "It's just my friend. She thinks I'm dead, it's a whole thing." Her words hung in the air like an awkward balloon, but no one laughed. Instead, there was only silence, followed by a long sigh from the woman with the tight bun. Emma could feel her face burning. This was going downhill fast. The woman seemed unfazed, though. "Let's continue," she said, though it sounded more like a command than a suggestion. "So, what are your greatest skills?" the gray-haired man asked. Emma froze. Her mind went blank. "I'm really good at improvising," she said, blurting out the first thing that came to mind. "For example, today the bobby pin I used to fix my dress could also double as a paperclip holder. Versatility is my middle name." The panel exchanged uncomfortable looks, unsure of how to process her response. Emma felt like she was sinking deeper into the abyss. And then, as if the universe had designed this moment just to test her, her resume, perfectly placed on the table, was caught by a sudden gust of air and flew straight into the air vent. Before she could react, she lunged to grab it, but in the process, she knocked over a glass of water, spilling it onto one of the interviewer's documents. "Oh my God!" she gasped, grabbing a piece of paper from her purse to try and dry it. But, of course, it wasn't just any paper, it was her grocery list, with things like extra strong laxative, deodorant that actually works, and sanitary pads written in bold letters. The panel stared at her, speechless. Trying to salvage the situation, Emma grinned awkwardly. "I'm extremely organized, as you can see." The woman with the bun rubbed her temples, clearly at her wit's end. "Miss Harris, why do you want to work at Taylor Global?" Emma's heart raced as she prepared to answer the question she'd rehearsed in the mirror, on the bus, and even while cooking breakfast that morning. But now, in this moment, she could only blurt out the truth, "Because I need to pay my bills. And it would be wonderful to do that without selling homemade fudge on the street." The panel was silent for a moment, and the gray-haired man removed his glasses, clearly processing what had just been said. "You do realize this is a multinational company, right?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Absolutely," Emma said with a nervous nod. "That's why I promise, if you hire me, I'll stop selling fudge and put all my energy into this job." She paused, then added, "Would you like to try some? I brought free samples." At this point, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, unsure of how to respond. Emma was certain she had blown it. This was it. There was no way they would hire her after this disaster. But then, the door swung open, and James Taylor, still wearing his coffee-stained shirt, walked in, looking entirely too amused. He paused, catching the eye of the interviewers before turning to Emma with a grin. "Well, this is certainly an interesting interview," he said, his voice rich with amusement. "You're hired." Emma blinked in disbelief. Had he just said she was hired? In the midst of all her mishaps, she had somehow won over the CEO of the company. James's laughter echoed through the room, and for the first time in her life, Emma felt like maybe, just maybe, her chaos wasn't a liability after all. Emma Harris couldn't believe her luck. Just a few days ago, she had spilled coffee all over the CEO of Taylor Global, stumbled through an interview with a laundry list of embarrassing blunders, and somehow, miraculously, had been hired. But nothing, not even the most bizarre day she could have imagined, prepared her for the next twist in her story. It all started with an unexpected request from James Taylor, her new boss. After a week of navigating through office mishaps, like knocking over an entire stack of important contracts or sending out emails with the wrong attachments, James called Emma into his office for a special assignment. When she entered, she noticed that he was unusually serious. "Emma," James began, his tone a little too formal, "we need to talk about something important." Emma's stomach did a nervous flip. "Did I break something else?" she asked, half joking, half serious. She had a history of leaving chaos in her wake, and she wouldn't have been surprised if she'd broken the office printer, spilled coffee on a computer, or somehow caused an electrical outage by pressing the wrong button. "No, no," James replied with a smirk. "It's a different kind of problem. The press has been hounding me lately. There are rumors about me, about us." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Rumors? Us?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" James sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Some of the board members think there's something going on between us. And the press is picking up on it. We need to cool things down before it gets out of hand." Emma blinked. "So, what are you suggesting?" James looked at her, clearly trying to suppress a smile. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend. Just for a month. It's the best way to get the media off our backs and make sure things don't escalate." Emma stared at him for a moment, wondering if he was joking. But the look on his face told her he was serious. I'm sorry. Did you just ask me to pretend to be your girlfriend?" she asked, incredulously. "Yes," he replied, his lips curling into a mischievous grin. "We'll tell everyone we're dating for a month, and after that, we'll say we broke up. Simple as that." Emma's mind raced. A fake relationship? With her boss? It sounded completely ridiculous. But at the same time, she realized that she didn't have a better option. The thought of being in the headlines for causing some sort of corporate scandal wasn't exactly appealing. "Well, I suppose that's one way to keep the press at bay," she said slowly, trying to wrap her head around the situation. "But, just to be clear, this is a fake relationship, right?" James nodded. "Right. We'll keep it casual. Just for appearances. Think of it as a temporary arrangement." Emma didn't know what to think. She had never imagined something like this happening to her, and certainly not at a company like Taylor Global. But as ridiculous as it sounded, she couldn't deny the practicality of the idea. What was the harm in playing along, especially if it meant avoiding a PR nightmare for both of them? "All right, I'm in," she finally said, a slight laugh escaping her. "But only if you buy me breakfast every day. Pancakes. Bacon. Orange juice. I've earned it after all the disasters I've caused." James chuckled, clearly amused by her proposal. "Deal. You've got yourself a month's worth of breakfasts." And so, the arrangement began. They started telling the office that they were dating, though Emma made sure to emphasize just how low-key their relationship was. She even posted a few photos of them together on social media, making it clear that this was all just for the sake of maintaining a good public image. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, sharing cute moments together and appearing completely in sync. But as the days went on, Emma began to notice something strange. James, the CEO who had seemed so distant and untouchable at first, was starting to look at her differently. He laughed at her jokes, real laughs, not the polite kind, and didn't seem to mind when she accidentally knocked over a stack of paperwork or sent a message with the wrong emoji. In fact, he seemed to enjoy her chaos in a way no one else did. For Emma, things were equally confusing. She had started to look forward to the time they spent together. There were moments when she'd catch James smiling at her, not because of some office joke, but because he genuinely seemed to enjoy her company. She found herself wondering if their fake relationship might actually be turning into something real. As the days passed, Emma Harris found herself getting more comfortable with the fake relationship she had agreed to with James Taylor. They spent more time together, attending business dinners and casual meetings with clients, always making sure to present the perfect couple for the cameras. Emma had even learned to smile naturally when photographers snapped their pictures, something she would have never imagined herself doing a few months ago. But what had started as a simple arrangement to protect James from a growing media frenzy slowly began to feel different. At first, it was just a few casual moments, like when James reached out to fix her hair when a stray curl got caught in her eyes, or when they shared a private joke after a long meeting. Emma had convinced herself it was all part of the act. After all, James was the CEO of a major company, and he couldn't afford to look anything but perfect, even if it was just for the media's sake. Yet, little by little, Emma began to notice small changes in herself too. There was a warmth in James's smile that hadn't been there before, an ease in the way he talked to her, as if the pressure of being just her boss had lifted. And when they weren't at work, he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say, no matter how chaotic or out of place it seemed. Emma had always known she wasn't the most polished person, but with James, her quirks seemed to be something he enjoyed rather than something to be fixed. One evening, after a long day at the office, they found themselves at a fancy restaurant in downtown Boston, a place where the walls shimmered with crystal chandeliers and the air smelled like rich leather and fresh flowers. Emma had dressed carefully, trying to look professional but still manage her own brand of chaos. She hadn't realized how out of place she felt until she saw the perfectly dressed guests around her. Everyone seemed so polished, so composed. But when James reached across the table to take her hand, she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. "You okay?" James asked, his voice soft as he squeezed her hand lightly. Emma blinked, looking at him. "I'm fine. Just a little overwhelmed, I guess. All this perfectness. It's not really me." James smiled, his gaze softening. "I don't think you need to worry about that. You've made it very clear to me that perfection is overrated." Emma couldn't help but laugh at that, her shoulders relaxing. "Well, I'm glad someone agrees with me." The waiter brought their food, a delicate serving of filet mignon and mashed potatoes, the kind of dish you'd see in a five-star restaurant. Emma attempted to cut the steak with a little too much force, and a piece of it flew off her plate, landing on James's lap. "Oh no!" Emma gasped, her face going red as she scrambled to apologize. James laughed, wiping the spot on his pants with a napkin. "At this point, I'm just glad it wasn't a full-blown disaster." Emma paused, looking at him as her heart fluttered. "You know, I've been trying to figure out if you're just being nice, or if you genuinely find this whole disaster of a relationship funny." James met her gaze, his expression a little more serious now. "I genuinely think it's one of the best things that's happened to me in years." Emma blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. She had been so focused on the fake nature of their relationship that she hadn't really stopped to think about how much they had started to rely on each other, how much he had started to depend on her in his own way. "I think I'm starting to believe you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. For a moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. James's hand still held hers, and Emma realized she wasn't just pretending anymore. She wasn't just the clumsy assistant. She was someone who mattered to him, and, for the first time in a long time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the line between fake and real wasn't as clear as she thought. The evening ended with a walk outside under the stars, their laughter echoing in the crisp night air. As they stood on the sidewalk, Emma looked up at the night sky, her thoughts racing. She had never expected to find herself here, in this whirlwind romance that started as nothing more than an act. But as she looked at James, standing next to her with a smile that made her heart race, she realized she didn't want to pretend anymore. What had started as a fake relationship was slowly transforming into something she couldn't ignore, something that felt incredibly real. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of business dinners, office meetings, and chaotic moments that had become Emma's trademark. She and James continued their fake relationship, making it seem like the perfect arrangement to the outside world. But, despite the public act, something had changed between them. Emma couldn't ignore the growing affection she felt for James, and she wasn't the only one noticing the shift. One afternoon, they were at a company gala, a grand event filled with the city's elite. The room sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed tables, where champagne flowed freely, and laughter echoed through the air. Emma felt out of place in the high society setting, but she was determined to make the best of it. She had come to appreciate James's company, even if their relationship still carried the weight of being for show. As they mingled with guests, Emma noticed James's attention had drifted away from her for a moment. He was deep in conversation with a group of executives when a woman approached Emma. The woman, tall and striking, was dressed in a sleek silver gown, her blonde hair cascading down her back like a golden waterfall. Emma instantly recognized her, Charlotte Anderson, James's ex-fiancée. Charlotte's smile was as cold as the marble floors beneath Emma's feet. "So, you're the infamous Emma," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "How charming. Keeping the seat warm, I see." Emma stood her ground, not one to back down. "It's a lot warmer than I expected," she replied, her smile as sweet as she could muster. Charlotte looked her up and down, unimpressed. "You really think you can fill my shoes? You're just a distraction, darling." Something in Emma snapped. For once, she didn't care about maintaining the act. "You may have had your time, but James is not just some prize to be won. He deserves someone who isn't afraid to be themselves." The silence between them was thick. Charlotte narrowed her eyes, but before she could respond, James appeared beside Emma, his presence a comforting anchor. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his voice calm yet protective. Charlotte shot him a look, then turned on her heel, leaving without another word. James turned to Emma, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I should have known you could handle yourself." Emma met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "James, Before she could finish, he leaned in, placing a gentle kiss on her forehead. "You don't need to explain anything. I know what this is, and I know what it isn't." Emma felt her world shift in that moment. Their fake relationship had turned into something more, something real, and she had finally stopped pretending. The following weeks were a blur for Emma Harris. The lines between her fake relationship with James Taylor and the real feelings she had for him had blurred beyond recognition. What had started as an arrangement to appease the media was now something far more complex. She found herself looking forward to the moments they spent together, whether they were navigating another business dinner or just enjoying quiet moments in the office. James had become more than just her boss, he had become someone she genuinely cared for. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, Emma and James found themselves alone in his office, both looking for a moment to unwind. The glow from the setting sun filtered through the tall windows, casting a soft golden hue on the room. Emma leaned against the desk, casually flipping through a folder of paperwork, while James sat at his chair, staring out at the city skyline. "Emma," James said, his voice softer than usual, "can I ask you something?" She looked up, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. "Of course," she replied, setting the folder aside. "What's up?" James stood and walked toward her, his eyes locked on hers. "This whole situation we've been in, it's been strange, right?" Emma chuckled nervously. "Strange doesn't even begin to cover it. But I think we've handled it pretty well." James smiled, though his eyes seemed to hold something more. "I think you've handled it better than anyone could have imagined," he said, taking her hand gently. and you've made me laugh more than anyone in years." Emma felt a flutter in her chest, her heart racing. She had known things were changing, but she hadn't realized just how deeply those changes went until now. "I've been thinking about this a lot lately," James continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This started as a lie, a public front. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize that it's not just a lie. What we have, it's real. And I don't want to pretend anymore." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? James dropped to one knee, and Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Emma Harris," he began, "you've turned my world upside down, in the best possible way. Will you marry me and make this chaos of a life ours forever?" The room seemed to freeze, the world outside fading into nothing. Emma looked at him, speechless for a moment, as everything around her came to a sudden halt. All the doubts, all the confusion, all the chaos, suddenly it didn't matter. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." James grinned and slipped a simple yet beautiful ring onto her finger, sealing the moment that would forever change both of their lives. As they stood there, surrounded by the mess of paperwork and the fading daylight, Emma realized that love had found its way into her life, not through perfection, but through the perfectly imperfect moments they had shared. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace the future, chaos and all. Emma Harris had always thought of herself as the type of person who would have a quiet, simple wedding, nothing too fancy or over the top. She imagined a small ceremony, perhaps with just a few close friends, some flowers, and a nice dinner afterward. What she didn't expect was a wedding that could only be described as perfectly chaotic, just like the relationship she had with James Taylor. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. Emma had never imagined planning something so elaborate, especially after the whirlwind romance that had started as a fake arrangement. There were meetings with caterers, dress fittings, and decisions about flowers that felt almost too overwhelming for her. But somehow, she found herself enjoying every moment of it. The chaos wasn't a burden anymore, it was a reminder of how far she and James had come. The morning of the wedding arrived, and Emma could barely contain her excitement, despite the usual last-minute disasters. She had woken up early, only to realize that her veil had somehow gotten tangled in her closet, and her makeup artist was running late. As she hurriedly tried to fix the veil, she couldn't help but laugh. It was as if the universe was reminding her that she was never going to be the perfect bride, and she was perfectly fine with that. James, on the other hand, was in a whirlwind of his own. He had been pacing around the house, trying to stay calm, but he couldn't help but feel nervous. His once immaculate suit, now slightly wrinkled from his constant movements, was a stark contrast to the perfectly curated image of a CEO he usually portrayed. Yet, in this moment, he didn't care. All that mattered was that he was about to marry the woman who had completely turned his world upside down. When the ceremony began, it was just as Emma had imagined, but with a twist. Her father, who was already fighting back tears, walked her down the aisle. As she approached the altar, her heart raced with a mix of nerves and excitement. James stood there waiting for her, looking every bit the handsome groom, though the smile he gave her was far more relaxed than the one he wore in the office. "Are you ready?" he whispered, his hand gently squeezing hers. Emma smiled, her nerves melting away. "I think I've been ready for this moment for a while." The ceremony itself was filled with little surprises. Emma's veil got caught on her heel as she stepped up to the altar, causing a minor stumble. A moment later, her bouquet nearly slipped from her hands, but James caught it with a laugh. They exchanged vows, which, for once, weren't scripted or rehearsed. They came from the heart, speaking of love, laughter, and embracing the messy parts of life. As they exchanged rings, a loud crash echoed through the hall. Emma had knocked over the candle holder with her elbow, and the entire room froze for a moment. But rather than panicking, Emma turned to James, her face lighting up with a grin. "Well, that's one way to start a marriage," she said, making everyone laugh. The reception was equally chaotic in the best way possible. Emma's dress got caught on a chair as she tried to sit down, and James spilled a drink on his shirt while trying to make a toast. But amid all the mishaps, there was so much love in the room. The guests danced, laughed, and celebrated with the couple as if nothing could be more perfect than this beautiful mess they had created. By the time the night came to an end, Emma and James were exhausted but overjoyed. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Emma rested her head on James's shoulder, feeling more at peace than she ever had in her life. The world outside was still spinning, full of the usual chaos, but inside this moment, everything felt right. As the music played, James whispered into her ear, "This is perfect." Emma smiled and looked up at him. "With you, even the chaos is perfect." And in that moment, as they swayed together under the dim lights of their wedding reception, Emma knew that her life, full of laughter, imperfections, and love, was exactly where it was meant to be. The story of Emma and James carries several important life lessons about love, acceptance, and embracing imperfections. One of the key lessons is accepting imperfection. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but it's the moments of stumbling and failure that enrich our experiences. Emma isn't perfect, but it's her natural and genuine personality that attracts James, and that's what makes their relationship strong. Another lesson is the power of sincerity in relationships. Although their relationship started as a fake arrangement, the real connection between Emma and James grew from shared understanding, vulnerability, and the willingness to face challenges together. This reminds us that in love, work, or friendships, authenticity and openness are the most crucial elements. Finally, the story affirms that happiness doesn't come from perfection, but from accepting each other's flaws. When we learn to love ourselves and those around us with all their imperfections, we find joy in the simplest things. Taking time to love, understand, and embrace our loved ones, especially in our later years, brings lasting peace and happiness.